Okay, I'm looking at 200% here. So this is a little bit blurry compared to the real pixels that are going to be seen. But if I just zoom out with Command minus once in Photopea, that's looking at the image in the actual pixels that it'll be printed with. And when I do that, I'll notice something. I'll notice that there's a watermark here, right? And there might be watermarks all throughout, which might mean that I want to make this layer a little bit more opaque so that those watermarks are not very noticeable. And then where they're still noticeable, I can do what's called internal compositing. So if you look on where the watermark is, I can just grab from that layer. This is for patching any kind of holes or any problems with your source material. You use my regular lasso, grab kind of a patch of it that's clean, hit Command J. I'm going to turn off auto select, and then just put that patch over the top. If I want to, I can hit Command J and make another one for another area that needs it. And if I needed to transition a little bit better, I can use my eraser with a really soft edge, so 0% hardness, and at an opacity of 100, and a pretty large, maybe 200 pixel size, and I can soften the edges of that cutout. So to get rid of hard edges is an important part of compositing. So you see it covers it up. And I can do that anywhere. Just Command J with that little internal composite. Anywhere those watermarks show up that I don't want them. Usually the answer in compositing is just cover it up with a new element, and blend it in. Okay, the other thing I can do is I can go to this background, cabbage leaf that I blurred with Gaussian blur, and I can use image adjustments. I can play with the levels. Play with lights and darks. Maybe I want it to be a little bit brighter in the midtones. Maybe I want to limit the highlights a little bit so it sinks back into the sky. Maybe I want to, under levels, you can also limit the shadows. Now I'm going to go to color balance. And if I want it to be not quite so pink, I can push it more towards the cyans and the blues, especially in the midtones. But then I don't want it to look too dead, so I'm going to go with the highlights and push it back towards a little bit of the warm. Now with the beat sun that I just pulled out, this is going to be really, really helpful to you. I am going to select the empty space around it, which is that super with the magic wand with contiguous unchecked. And that shows me the really clean selection. Photopea is really good at selecting empty space. But now I want to do what's called refining the edge. And you'll see that in the options for all the selection tools. So we have not done this yet. If you refine the edge, you can set up a border that you want to create and kind of extend your selection a little bit. And you can put that onto a new layer, like so. So now that's a layer that's on top of my beat. Now with this layer, what can I do to soften the edge? I can use a layer style and I can make it glow. But if I don't want to have to use layer styles, I can use Gaussian blur, just like we did on the sky. So I go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian blur, but now it's just on the edge. And this is amazingly helpful for compositing. And I can decide how much I want to blur that edge. So this is without it, that's with it. And if I want it more, I can actually just hit Command J and keep duplicating until it's too much, right? Like that. And I just made lots and lots of copies of the blur, and then I can delete them back until it's about the blur I want. So all of these are different, like blurred edge. If I turn off the beat, that's what it looks like. It's like a little corona around the moon during an eclipse. Okay, now, if I want to, I can also soften with Gaussian blur under filter. Just take sharpness away. So you go to filter, blur, Gaussian blur. This is the most controllable. And then maybe a little less so, I'm going to blur out the inside of the beat. And now I'm going to merge all of these layers together by holding Shift, just the border and the beat. So it's all one element. And then I go to Layer, Merge Layers. The shortcut for that is Command E. So now I have a beat that actually has kind of this radiant glow around it, which is really good for anything that's in orbit. Even though it's still in sharp focus. And if I want to sync that focus back so it really looks kind of dimensional into a deep sky, I can just take the overall opacity down of that beat sun so that it's like it's being surrounded by the atmosphere around it. Okay, next. Well, I can also play with the layer adjustments of the beat sun. So let's see. If I'm going to have green like this on top of it, maybe I want the sun. I go to Image Adjustments. I'm going to play with its levels. Going to brighten it a little bit. There we go. I'm going to limit its shadows a little bit. Then I'm going to go to Color Balance. I'm going to shift it towards the warms in the highlights. Towards the warms in the midtones. And in the shadows, maybe just towards the cyans. Maybe a little bit towards the blue. You can see if that made any difference. So that's what the sun was before, and it kind of looks transparent. Now it has that warmth on top of it, even though it's still kind of sunken in. And now I can start cutting out some of these other elements, like my kale and broccoli crown hills. So before I cut it out, I want to play with those direct adjustments. So that's really bright green, which is nice. But if I go to levels, I can at least see, do I want it to be pushed a little bit brighter or a little bit darker? Maybe just a tad darker, because these are background mountains. Maybe I want to limit the shadows just a little bit. Take some of that contrast out. Maybe limit the highlights just a little bit. Not much. Then I go to Image Adjustments and I play with Color Balance. I'm going to push the shadows towards the blues, towards cyan, towards blue. Take the midtones. I'm going to push those a little bit towards the blues. That's going to make it feel like it's set into the background. But then the highlights, I'm still going to keep a little warm. That keeps them three-dimensional and looking fully rounded. And I can always use my history to see if I like that change. It started like this. Now it's like this. Then let's see, I can play with the big guns if I want. Image, adjustments, hue, saturation. This is the third step. And I could shift that green to something else if I wanted. If I wanted to warm it up a little bit, which I think I do. Or if I want to increase its intensity, but in this case, because it's deep in the background, I want to take down its saturation just a little bit. Still looks green, but now it kind of sits back in space a little bit better versus what it looked like before, which was that. So little shifts, little changes. And maybe I don't like the warmth of the hue saturation. Maybe I take it back before I did that. Okay, now how do I get a clean cutout? Well, I always like to do those direct adjustments before I do a clean cutout because that helps with your selection and it helps you see what you get. Because this was shot on a white background, I can try just using my lasso with a tolerance of 32 with contiguous turned on and select all the white, right? And when I do that and I hit delete, it's going to give me a very sharp cutout because anti-alias is turned on. It's going to slightly soften and give a slight little halo around it. So this is what we do. Under your magic wand, you have feather. I'm going to make it a 2-pixel feather. It's kind of like Gaussian blur at the edge. But when I select with a 2-pixel feather, and I select the empty space, computers are very good at selecting empty space. Now when I hit delete, look what happens. Instead of it cutting the pixel directly, it's going to soften from that edge. And the more I hit delete, the more it will soften it. See that? So that it gets rid of that little white halo. Now I have these interior whites as well. So if I keep that feather on and I use the magic wand, I can select them. And I can select them one by one. So we're going to augment selections now by using Shift. When you hold down Shift in a selection tool, you're going to add to your selection. So I'm selecting multiple white shapes at once. These little cutouts. These little slivers. Okay, now, I think I got them all. Up some down here. Now when I hit delete, it already starts to feather it, but I have that little halo, so I'd hit delete a couple more times until I get rid of that little halo completely. I'll have a nice cutout. I don't need to do it where I don't need it, where other things overlap it or when it's off of my picture plane. Now the broccoli, you'll notice this broccoli, some parts of it are sharper than others. So if I first play with adjustments, I can try to bring back some of that control. Whoops, I'm on the wrong layer. There we go. Remember, you can only affect a layer when you're selected on it. So I'm going to make that a little bit brighter. I'm going to limit the highlights a little bit. And maybe sharpen or darken the shadows. Okay, now I'm going to go to color balance. I'm going to start with the highlights. I'm going to warm them up. But everything else is going to go cooler. Image, adjustments, color balance. Change it to the midtones, push that a little bit more towards cyan, a little bit more towards blue. See how it's sharpening up? Shadows, a little bit more towards cyan, a little bit more towards blue. Not too much. Now if I need